for me today and every moment of Sridevi's is just takes me back to my entire childhood, my entire being, my passion and love for the movies, my absolute obsession with Hindi cinema. I think she has a large part to do with it. I can't recall the moment where I thought I'd fell madly in love with her. I was just her biggest fan. And I grew up in South Bombay, and that was a locality where kids around me weren't very, I would say they weren't very interested or excited in Hindi cinema at that time. It was in the 80s. I grew up in this neighborhood that you would know, Anil. I grew up in Malabar Hill, and kids in my area, they were a lot more, I think initially more interested in, you know, whether it was comics or it was like other forms of entertainment, Hindi cinema being the lowest in their priority list. I, unfortunately or fortunately, was just not very sporty and not very interested in everything else. So I just sat at home and watched movies. And I remember watching all of Sridevi's earlier works. And
the loss of sports is the gain of movies.
It's the gain of movies. Well, I don't advocate that at all, because I think, you know, being sporty is all good for various reasons, not just the athletic part of it or the fitness part of it, just in terms of your headspace. But I just grew up watching, I remember watching her appearance in Julie, and, you know, and then went on when she made her big comeback with
Julie,
Himmat.
she had a small role.
Yeah, but Himmat Wala was where I remember going with my house help at that time to see Himmat Wala in a cinema hall. And because nobody in my immediate surrounding wanted to come with me, and I went multiple times and saw Himmat Wala. And then every other movie after that. And I remember literally dancing on a pot and a pan like she had. And this just, my love story began with her, and it just never ended. And I remember my father was releasing a film on the same day as Mr. India. He released a film called Muqaddar Ka Faisla, which was directed by a very prolific filmmaker, Prakash Mehra. And my father was very hurt with me because on the opening day, I went running to see Mr. India. I didn't see my father's film. And then Kaate Nahi Katte became my anthem for that whole year. It wasn't a very, I'm sure, a very fun sight to see me dance to Kaate Nahi Katte, and which my father and mother endured right through that year.
Can you demonstrate a few steps?
No. You know, I would have till
Let's make this video viral.
Till I gave birth to my 2 children, I would have done that embarrassing thing right now. But I know eventually they're going to start watching these YouTube videos and just wonder what their dada is up to. But anyway, I just want to say that she just became like my entire being, like everything about her.
What was it about her?
I think it was just her eyes. It was like she spoke like through her eyes. You know, it was just everything from just her eyes, the way she emoted. She just became like I felt like she was talking to me right through those movies. And I felt every time she moved and she spoke, she had this magical quality of just connecting with you. And she just seemed unattainable, inaccessible, and just the way you want your stars to be, you know. And I just put her up on that pedestal, and she became like every movies of hers. And those movies that no one else saw, I saw. You know, I saw every film of hers. And there used to be these big fights we used to have about who's a bigger Sridevi fan or who's a bigger Madhuri Dixit fan, and I used to take it so personally because it was really, and when Chandni released, like you said, it became my obligation to keep dragging people from college, because I was in my first year junior college at that time at HR, and just wanted them to convert to being a Sridevi fan just the way I was. It just became a personal obsession and a personal mission for me at that point of time.
Yes.
Of course, I had the great fortune of knowing her. And I asked her, and I said, you know, when did you train in classical dance? And she said, sets have been my only training ground. Whether, she said, I'm not a trained Kathak dancer, trained Bharatnatyam dancer, I know nothing. I know how to dance in motion pictures, and that's what I picked up on sets. And it's amazing because actually, if you see, it's not that her footwork was ever that bang on or correct. You know, if you see Madhuri Dixit's footwork, it's much more like correct and technically on point. But Sridevi's face danced. Her face danced, and that's what always matters in cinema. She danced for the camera.
That's a lovely phrase, her face dance.
You know, she danced for camera. Yeah. She didn't dance for you to give her an award in classical dance. She danced to woo you and just make you appreciate just that expression that she brought to the table.
She really didn't have any childhood at all. You refer to it in the book a bit, but I wonder what kind of deep psychological impact it had on her. because she had no childhood. Uh, Karan, any theories on that?
I mean, I can't say that, I know enough about her state of mind for me to understand what she went through, but I could see that for her world was the film set, was the movies, was not even the people in the movies, it was just her relationship with the camera, Anil. It was like she had this switch on, switch off, which I'm sure Satyarth has written in the book as well, because I've seen it up close. And it is something that, you think that you've heard it as legend goes in the movies, that Sridevi had this switch on, switch off, but it was just that. It's like whatever she did, she conserved her energy only for that moment that had to be captured on celluloid. She gave it her all and she became just completely another person when the camera went off. She would just sink into her chair and be quiet, not talk. She also, and initially there was a lot, I don't think she was comfortable just in her mother tongue and the languages that she'd performed with down south. So she wouldn't really communicate with you because Hindi was something she was grappling with and English was not her, her strength at that time. So I think she just kept to herself. So I'm sure that it was a lonely life because, when you have just a relationship with the movies you do and the relationship you have with the camera and nothing else, I'm sure that leaves you with lots of thoughts floating in your head. And, inherently creative people are lonely people. But I think she just had a very singular relationship with the camera. Like, I feel like the camera was her best friend. And when I saw her up close on sets, and she did a film for my father called Gumrah, and I used to go on the sets all the time and just stand there like a bystander and a fan.
Did you ever study?
Yes, I did.
Because your obsession seems to have been total.
I'm Gemini, so there are two of me. One of mine was nose deep into my books because I was, no one would believe it, but I was a topper in school and college. But the only extracurricular activity of mine was watching movies. And a large part of that was just studying Sridevi. And every time my father had an outdoor, I remember I went to Mauritius. I went through that entire film. I think I was on the set more than Mahesh Bhatt was. He was the director. And I think I was just there all through the making of that film, just standing quietly watching her and studying her and just obsessively wanting to get. I was so dying to be her best friend. I tried everything. I used to go and sit next to her, talk to her, tell her all about but she was just quiet, always quiet. And she just took compliments or any kind of adulation just the way she would treat silence. Like it wouldn't bother her.
In fact, I think also it had to do with her language problem because, as you say, Hindi was something she was learning on the sets kind of thing. And English, because she didn't go to school, she didn't learn English. And so she knew only South Indian languages. So it was very difficult for her to communicate. And the media got to know her by this sentence, ask mother. Because any question directed to her, mother would always be there. So she'd say, ask mother.
Well, I think that was blown out of proportion. Initially, it was one interview she said it in, and it became Ask Mummy, became like the thing. It was just to, I think, just kind of we made it into her because she never communicated with anyone. And she didn't like do any interviews to that extent. But I think that she pretty much knew what she was doing on her own. I think, sometimes, when, and that's the thing about Sridevi is that, and Satyarth says she's an actor by observation, I completely agree with that. She's amazing what she can absorb from your body language. Like she'll notice you, observe you. She was the best mimic in the world. She could just mimic anything and anything at all because it was just observation. And she's the only actor from the 80s and 90s who had upped her craft because of observation. When she performed in English Winglish after a 15-year sabbatical from the movies, her craft was upped. She had actually absorbed herself into the syntax of cinema at that time. And when she performed...
You're saying she was not stuck in her time?
Not at all. Yeah. And there are many actors who don't seem to get out of that zone that they were great in at one point of time. But she knew how to face the camera as an actor in 2012. She just knew it. When I watched that film, English Winglish, of course, huge contribution of the writing and Gauri Shinde's brilliant direction in that film. But it was just the way she... Because you could tell that through those 15 years, she had watched every single English, international, Hindi, other regional languages. She used to see all the movies. She had observed the craft. She had a long chat with me about Meryl Streep once. I remember we were having dinner and I told her what a big Meryl Streep fan I was and am. And she had such a voluminous chat with her. I've never spoken so much to Sridevi in my life, but she really loved Meryl Streep. And went back so impressed that she had watched the films, studied her nuances, understood her motivations, absorbed them, and even emulated them. Not that she went to film school, not that she was on film sets, just by observation. I would go as far as saying that Sridevi was a genius artist because it takes a lot of genius to do what she did in so many different types of films. And the other thing that we must know about her, she's a rare actor that was on top of her game in all languages at the same time. Whether it was Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, she was on top. A feat no other actor in India has achieved.
I think in all 4 South Indian languages, am I right?
Yes. And on top, like number one, as they said in those days.
And I will give that message considering that she was so very sexy. She was so sexy.
I don't think she knew any of this, by the way.
I had no idea.
I'm not sure
She had
that
no
none
idea.
of this was on her list of agendas, that she was going to be an LGBT phenomena. And I think she was just doing what she was doing and doing it to her best. She just knew that she had reached a position in time where at one point of time she dropped the sexy image and went into performing art, leading the game in Indian cinema. She stopped playing that card altogether. She
Films like Lame and...
no, even before that, where it was like, it started in the late 80s, from Mr. India onwards, actually. From 1987 onwards, she just became the lead force. It was not that she's a leading lead. She just became a lead force in a film. And she didn't do any film where she was not a lead force. Even in a film like Khuda Gawah, which was Mr. Bachchan's major cinema vehicle, she had an outstanding part, almost equal to him, if not larger, in that respect. The last 30 minutes or 20 minutes of Khuda Gawah, I believe, are the best part, one of the finest parts of Indian cinema in terms of mainstream Indian cinema. It's just that climax when she looks at him and while there's all destruction surrounding them and they're just walking towards each other. I think I've seen that climax about 50 times. I just went crazy every time she would just say, wo aayega, and then he just arrives and there's that music. And I think that the cinema buff in me just had I'm going to say a word that I shouldn't say, but anyway, everyone gets the point.
Yeah, right. Which do you think is her best film?
I've seen films of hers, and I think Pankaj is here, so I can say that Chalbaz, Chandni, Lamhe, there's so many of them. Mr. India, Khuda Gawah. I think these were the films that I've seen multiple times, but there are films that her performance in Sadma, even her performance in a film that maybe no one may have seen, but I've seen multiple times, a film called Tofa. She's just outstanding in so many of these movies. I loved her in English. I think it will be always considered one of her finest performances. She's just incredible, even when films are not incredible. She was always incredible. But if I can't just zero in on one, when you're a fan of this level, then it's very tough to just point out that one film because, it's been an experience for you watching every film.
About what the actor, actress does and not whether they're big at the box office or not.
That totally is true, Anil, and that's true in any phase or any decade of Indian cinema. But these labels, I don't think are ever been given by the actors themselves. I think nobody has actually just walked on set and saying, I'm number one, and this is what I want. I think those labels were pretty much, there was this kind of slightly semi-cheesy tabloid magazine culture that had these big, forceful headlines. Now replaces, displaced, over, shattered, number one, not number one, off the ladder, up the ladder. All this was just terminology given by the media. It still is. I think that then that media creates the perception, and then the actors start then living that reputation, and in their decisions. I feel like at one point, if people didn't write those things, maybe those decisions would have been different for the actors. I think Sridevi particularly knew she was on top of her game and number one, if you call it, but I think that she always still chased the films. I remember very clearly Yash uncle telling me about how she heard the narration of Chandni, and she had just two things to say. And the two things she said were the two changes they made, in the narrative. Because it's not that she was just doing the film because it was a major setup. It was around her. It was called Chandni. She had a legit input. And I can say this with myself because when I narrated a film to her that she was meant to do before she passed away, she had read the script. She made her notes. She told me few brilliant things that I wish we had all listened to. because she said some really, really wonderfully, I would say, intuitive things, you know. So she always had that sense. So I think that's why her movies were always, some of them were always ahead of their times, you know, in a certain sense. You know, they made, like a film like Lamhe was very progressive for that time. It would be progressive in any time. But she just knew which were the films, and she also wasn't deluded at all. She always knew where she was not so good in a film and that she hadn't given her. Like once she told me, this is a dishonest performance. I can't remember which film. She says a dishonest performance. And she said it's not honest. And I think it takes a lot for you to have that sense of self. I think that she wasn't given credit for a lot of things that actually she was. She was known more as this elusive, exclusive, major motion picture movie star. But there was a ticking brain there that I don't think she got enough credit for.
And I think the one thing that distinguished her was her comic timing.
Oh yeah, exceptional, exceptional.
And there's a sequence in Mr. India where she does a
Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin imitation.
And all of Chalbaz, actually. She's just fantastic in that film. It's like, you know, anybody who knows anything about comic time will tell you that she was really like somebody who represented that timing like no one else did.
How much was due to Pankaj Parashar, who I'm not looking at, and Sridevi?
I think there's no film that can be made without the strong combination of a filmmaker and actor. I think it's really when a filmmaker understands his or her world and vision and narrative, and an actor contributes. Having seen Sridevi on my own, I know that her contributions are tremendous, but you can't make those decisions on set without the validation of a filmmaker.
Do you think that Sridevi did something to a sari?
Did something to?
A sari.
I think a sari did something to Sridevi.
No, because
I remember, so you know that there is I don't know if Satyarth has written this about the challenge that Shekhar Kapoor took up from Feroz Khan, where Feroz Khan had her in a yellow sari in a film called Jambaz, and he said, I don't think I can make any woman look, nobody can make Sridevi look as beautiful and as beautifully sexy as she's looked in my film. And Shekhar Kapoor took up that challenge, and Mr. India with Kaate Nahi Karte, I mean, I think is like the benchmark of sexy in cinema.
I think Yash Chopra also put her in a chiffon sari.
But Yash Chopra, chiffon sari was a big part of his cinema DNA. But vis-a-vis just complete beauteousness and aesthetic, the way, you know, the visuality, if you go about how Kaate Nahi Karte is shot, it's so amazingly sexy with such strong aesthetic. It's done in an immensely credible way. Like nowhere do you feel like at all like, you know, squirmish or you feel like cringy watching it. It's just stunningly sexy, that song. And I think he completely took up that competition and really like aced it. I think he won that game for sure.
Now, Karan, as a director, you handle a lot of actors. What distinguishes a great actor from a good actor?
Immediate instinct. I think a good actor has instinct, but you know it takes a while for it to unravel. You know, it comes over a period of time. It probably you find that instinct in a character on a film at some point of time during the film. A great actor has immediate instinct about what to do and what not to do, and how to kind of adapt your body language or say the dialogue in a certain way, or maybe sit or stand in a scene, or just adapt to the surrounding in a way that is so in tune with the character and the film. I think that's what I believe separates a great actor. And all the great actors I worked with, they have solid immediate instincts. And all the good actors I worked with, I find that instincts are a tad delayed.
So, is a director almost superfluous with a great actor?
Well, I think it's almost like a great actor exercises his or her immediate instinct, and a good director understands the importance of that decision, you know, and doesn't come in the way of it. I think sometimes when you are a solid filmmaker, you also very set in the way of your narrative. You know, you're so entrenched with your narrative that sometimes you don't understand when somebody's done something that may be outside of the, you know, of the narrative or outside of the scene or the moment. It may not immediately agree with you in your head, but you should understand the importance of what it can do for your film. You know, and that is when you kind of agree with that immediate instinct of a solid actor and go with it as opposed to coming in the way. Because many a time I've seen that happen as a producer myself. I've seen that sometimes an actor has taken a very sharp decision and a director has come in the way of that and actually grabbed that scene or that moment from some kind of genius because of it.
Tell me, this film you were going to do with Sridevi, the one which didn't happen.
Yeah.
What was she going to be doing in that?
It was the film called Kalank, where she was playing Madhuri's role, and she had agreed to do it. And she was prepping for it. We had gone and met her, and she was playing like a head courtesan of an area, and she was also had an illegitimate son in the film, and it was a layered. And she had one major song in it, and it was my big dream to actually work with her. Though I wasn't directing the film, I was producing it. And we had multiple sessions, and unfortunately, she passed away in February, and the film was going on the floors in April. And right after that, I mean, we just didn't take any decision for a month, and then we went to Madhuri, and she was very gracious and completely, I think, being somebody who admired. She was not only a colleague and contemporary, but someone, I think, even though they weren't friends, but at a distance, I think, as an actor, she respected the craft and the brilliance of Sridevi, and she felt this was her way of paying tribute to her.
Karan, to end, let me ask you, if you were older than you are, and you were really a contemporary of Sridevi, and you were directing films, what would you have done with a star like that? A fantasy project.
Anil, for me, I can't even imagine that because, as I said, I've dedicated so much of my childhood just observing, watching, and loving her. I may have just lost complete objectivity. I may have given her possibly much more to do than was required of the character. And maybe the film would have suffered as a result. So I'm not sure I would have been the best director for her because I would have been too much of a fan. And I feel somewhere a filmmaker has to be very objective about his or her work. Because I think the moment you lose, and fandom can make you lose objectivity. And I think I would have lost complete objectivity. So I'm glad I never got to direct her because I would have given her a bona fide failure, which she did not deserve.
And read much more about Sridevi than we have discussed. Thank you, Karan. Thank you, Satya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anil.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you to all our panelists, Karan Johar, Anil Dharkar, Satyat Naik. Thank you to our partners.